By the way, this is the first time he calls the disciples, my brethren. Go tell my brothers. He didn't call them my brethren at the Last Supper after they enjoyed this final meal together, had this special time together. He didn't say at the Last Supper, you know what, guys, you're my brothers. You're my brothers. He didn't call them my brethren after a long day of ministering together with them, like when they fed the 5,000 and Jesus multiplied the bread and the fish and the disciples served all the people. At the end of that day, he didn't say, you're my brethren. You're my brothers in the ministry. No, it's after, please listen, it's after they forsook him, after they abandoned him, after they denied him. Jesus reassures them by calling them my brethren. When they might expect Jesus to call them something else or to call them by some other name, he reassures them in a new way by calling them my brethren, my brothers. Listen, that's grace. That's grace. Grace is undeserved kindness from God at a time when the disciples deserve a rebuke. He blesses them. And God deals with you and me on the basis of grace, his undeserved kindness. Now, does that mean we should sin so that his grace may abound? Of course not. But where our sins abound, Paul says his grace does much more abound. So when we sin, when we blow it, when we fail, when we deny him in some way, his grace does much more abound towards us. Go tell my brethren to go to Galilee, and there they will see me. And so the women went and told the other disciples about Jesus, that he's alive. But you know what happened? The disciples did not believe the testimony of the women. I told you the testimony of women wasn't considered trustworthy in that day, in that culture. In fact, Luke's gospel tells us the disciples thought the women were delirious. Maybe delirious from grief. And you can imagine the women coming back with fear and joy, it says, excited, saying that an angel came down, rolled the stone away, and then they saw Jesus Christ and he's alive, and he said we should go to Galilee and he'll meet us there. And you can imagine the disciples mansplaining to these two women, no, you probably were just at the wrong tomb. I'm sure you're just at the wrong tomb. It was probably a tomb that looked like his tomb. You're not very good with directions anyways. You just probably went to the wrong one. It was probably a guy that looked like Jesus. It wasn't Jesus you were talking to. Mark's gospel tells us that later that night, Jesus appeared to the 11 disciples, and it says he rebuked them for their unbelief because they refused to believe those who had seen him after he was risen. He rebuked them for not believing the testimony of the women. And the women were like, I told you, see? Now that brings us to verse 11. And this interesting detail about the soldiers who were guarding the tomb, this is only recorded in Matthew's gospel. Verse 11 says, now while they were going, the women were going to tell the disciples, behold, some of the guard came into the city of Jerusalem and reported to the chief priests all the things that had happened. Now these are Roman guards. And the Roman guards do not go to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, their boss. They go to the priests. They need to talk to a priest about this here, what's happened. Pilate will likely not believe their story that an angel came down from heaven, an angel rolled the stone away and all that. So they go to the Jewish leaders, and the Jewish leaders, who were the ones, remember, that had Jesus crucified, and they thought they were finished with him. The Jewish leaders now call an emergency meeting of the Sanhedrin in verse 12 when they had assembled with the elders and they consulted together. They talked this over. What are we going to do now? they gave a large sum of money to the soldiers, saying, "Tell them his disciples came at night and stole him away while he slept. And if this comes to the governor's ears," Pontius Pilate, "we will appease him and make you secure." Now, let me give you some context here. The Roman soldiers could be put to death for sleeping while on watch. And they could be put to death for failing to guard the tomb and guard the body of Jesus Christ, because that's what their assignment was. And so this must have been a pretty large sum of money they paid to the soldiers to get them to agree to say that they fell asleep, and while they slept, the disciples stole the body of Jesus. They're agreeing to a death sentence here. That's why they say here, they'll appease Pontius Pilate for them if it comes to him. And the soldiers now, they agree to this cover-up story. The religious leaders of Judaism, remember, they bribed Judas to betray Jesus. Now they bribe the guards to spread this false story about the empty tomb and the body of Jesus. Verse 15 says, "So they took the money and did as they were instructed. And this saying is commonly reported among the Jews until this day." Now, there are also writings from the 2nd and 3rd century by Justin Martyr and Tertullian that state that this false story about the body of Jesus, this heresy, was still being circulated by the Jews in their time in the 2nd and 3rd centuries.